Today we will be discussing self-focusing. Self-focusing is an important issue because sometimes the Muslim community has a problem. It struggles with, Muslims have a tendency to not mind their own damn business. Seriously. Everybody's pointing and looking like, look what he's doing. Oh, look what they're doing. No, stop it. Stop. I can't tell you how many times somebody has come to me and said, I wish, so-and-so would shut up, or I wish my parents would mind their own business, I wish my aunts would mind their own business, I wish my uncles would mind your business, that's all. Mind your business. And a lot of times it doesn't even have to be the elders. Once upon a time I used to be a 19-year-old undergrad who felt after a semester or two and reading a couple of fancy books I had all the answers. I know that this is a tradition that carries on from generation to generation, and there's a very limited self-awareness in that age. There's a lot of dudes out there who Google sheikhs, essentially, going around telling people what to do and how to act, and that you're a kafir and you're a kafir. Quran police, basically. We hear the call to promote the good and denounce the evil. A lot of people take up that call without having very much common sense or manners. You shut your mouth! I understand the motivation because I used to be that guy. Ultimately, what we have is a lot of young men who believe they have the knowledge to understand life without actually having lived very much of it. All they really end up doing is just antagonizing people. There's a lot of dudes who just do that for fun. Again, I'm no different. I've been there as well, and I've said a lot of dumb stuff. Guys, this is the internet age. You say that dumb stuff, it's gonna come back to bite you in the ass. Guaranteed. Because God has a sense of humor about these things, and He will laugh at you. But there's a lot of stress in the community just because people don't mind their own damn business. What is self-focusing? I'm not 100% sure because I'm still kind of working on it. And I'm sure somebody else out there has had a similar or better idea that they've put together, but you're here, so you're gonna have to deal with what I got. And so self-focusing is different than selfishness. It's different than self-centeredness. It is the concept that you are looking at yourself before you look at anyone else. You are looking at your own behaviors before you are looking at anyone else's. You are assessing your own actions before you assess anyone else's. So, for example, there's a lot of memes or lists floating around mental health social media that discuss things like boundaries, that discuss things like obligations. There's a lot of affirmations out there like, I will not fix others.
What about yourself?
Others' happiness is not my responsibility.
What about yourself?
Others' emotions are not my responsibility.
What about yourself?
My happiness is my responsibility.
What about yourself?
And there's more of them that we'll discuss in the future, but the examples and the definitions are going to grow as the show goes on. I think it's something that we're going to slowly develop that will include self-awareness and self-caring, proper self-care, not crappy self-care. Ultimately, the goal is to be able to recognize how our surroundings are affecting us and we are affecting our surroundings, and looking inwards before we search outwards for any sort of validation or whatever. So how do we practice this? In the age of the Google Sheikh and the ability to communicate with anyone and everyone all the time, I think one of the most difficult practices of self-focusing is focusing on what you're putting out there, focusing on the messages and the ideas you are supporting and putting out there. Something that has worked for me, and I'm still working on it, is the idea of social celibacy. Social media celibacy, but social celibacy, just alliteration. That means when somebody posts something that you disagree with, don't give a okay? When somebody makes a comment that isn't accurate but doesn't affect you, don't give a It is letting that which truly does not matter slide. Celibacy is about not on social media. Stop giving out I, in my early 20s, was that guy who always had to say something. It was that meme where it was just like, I can't sleep now, somebody on the internet is wrong. I gave too many F's. I was a social media whore in that regard. And the sooner you stop giving F's, the more you'll have for yourself. Okay, that's not the best example. It was only after I had taken a break from social media and I had started to only care about myself and focus on myself and self-focus. You see what I did there? I realized that not giving an F about things that don't matter is no big deal. It's not that anyone's asking you not to care about what's going on in the world. Think about, will it make a difference if you make a comment? Stay quiet about stuff. You'll be surprised how quickly you realize, A, just how few people were paying attention in the first place, and B, how inconsequential a lot of our comments are. As a result, understanding that can feel like a source of liberation, where we don't suddenly have the pressure to constantly say something or respond or do this. If you want something to actually practice, if somebody says something you disagree with, don't give that just keep it to yourself. Be socially celibate. Keep it to yourself. And I'm particularly eyeballing the dudes out there. We have this urge to always gotta type out all the things and correct everybody. Who gives a shit? Who gives a shit? You're not changing anything. And it took me a long time to realize this message.
What about yourself?
Not your job to change anybody. Not your job to change anybody. Not your job to educate. Not your job to... Unless it's your job, it's not your job. Unless you're not getting paid for it, you're just wasting time. Nobody's even reading the responses. Nobody cares. Nobody cares. Stop it. Nobody cares. That's the first step to self-focusing, is to stop giving an F about so many other things. Start giving an F about yourself. Keep your sanity. Don't dump it all out onto the internet.
What about yourself?
So a few years back on the social medias, there was a video circulating of this Muslim brother who was on a stage with his sports team, and they were accepting medals because they had won something of sports. The presenter, dressed up in a suit, putting the medals on, good for him, and there was this lady holding this tray with the medals on it, and she was in a bikini. So this brother, he lowers his hat onto his face as a form of lowering his gaze and not be tempted to look at this woman in a bikini in front of him. Now, once upon a time, I laughed at this video, and I actually mocked, and I would say, ha ha ha, that guy can't even look at a woman. Look at this guy, what is he doing? He can't even look at a woman and not...
I want a diamond ring, I want some bracelets and everything. Daddy, you better get...
And here's the thing, I'm not very much like him, most likely. I probably wouldn't do the same thing in his position. Upon re-watching that video, I actually came to respect his actions. Here's the thing, we don't actually know anything about this guy. All we can observe is this action. We have to acknowledge that we are probably reading into this, but we are interpreting his actions. Whether you are a bit more progressive and liberal in your Musliming, or whether you are a bit more orthodox and conservative in your Musliming, there are certain things about this video that we can all learn from. So the first part is that he is a member of a larger community. His Muslimness has not gotten in the way of that. He is competing, he is winning, and he is part of a team. Good on him for being Muslim and sports. 2, he is living his faith up to his abilities. There are a lot of Muslim guys, myself included, who in a similar situation, we would just sort of go with the flow of what's around us. This guy actually brought the cap down. Respect to him. I know a lot of guys who wouldn't. I probably wouldn't. And this last observation, I think this is probably the crux of it. This is the key point, and this is why it truly resonated with me. His beliefs that he should lower his gaze is self-focused, focusing on his actions. He is focusing on what he has to do to follow his own beliefs. That is one of the key elements of self-focusing, is that you are focused on your own actions, your own abilities to adapt and to change in an environment.
What about yourself?
You know what you can handle, and you know your own limits, you know your own abilities.
What about yourself?
As Muslims, we have these narratives that help us relate to God, and that we have a lot of narratives that help us relate to others. And we have relationships with all of creation. There are rules of how and when we can cut trees, and how we treat animals, and when we can eat them. In my personal experience, I have never really come across any narratives or any examples of how we are to relate to ourselves. The ones that come up on the Day of Judgment: your eyes are going to speak out against you, your body is going to speak out against you, your tongue is going to speak out against you, your heart is going to speak out against you. Will our brains speak out against us? Will they say, he just filled me with reality TV and celebrity gossip, crappy music?
Jim Carrey has a bunch of turds in his apartment. It's Jim Carrey in whatever, you'll pay to go see it. You, July 12th.
This person only watched sports games that are just fancy versions of Pong. Majority of sports can be boiled down to fancy Pong. That's all it is. That's the relationship with ourselves that's presented, that our bodies will speak out against us. Part of self-focusing is trying to develop or cultivate a relationship with our bodies, with ourselves, with our mind, that hasn't really been expressed in a lot of Islamic narratives that I've come across, at least. We don't really have a narrative of treat yourself as a creation of God. You look around and you marvel at all of God's creations, but are you observing yourself as one of those creations? If you haven't been observing yourself as one of God's creations, one, ask yourself why. And two, ask yourself how different your opinion or your understanding of yourself is versus your understanding of yourself as a creation of God. Once I had the opportunity to do that, I suddenly realized, wow, I don't treat myself very good as a creation of God. I'm quite disrespectful to this creation of God. And that's really bizarre, because we should be treating ourselves well, but we don't. So that's a thing. I think a lot of this stems out of the desire for altruism in Islam. We're supposed to be generous. We're not supposed to be self-serving or self-centered. We're not supposed to be selfish. I think a lot of the romantic notions around being so selfless come from ideas of Sufi narratives, of giving yourself completely to the will of God and to taking care of others because God will take care of you. And that's a beautiful sentiment. However, that takes years and years, a lifetime sometimes, of discipline and practice. We should all in some way aspire to it, but it's not something that everybody and anybody can pick up. You can't just start giving and giving and giving and giving and not expect any sort of compassion fatigue. People face burnout. These things happen. Even Sufis take time to take care of themselves. This mythology of the selfless, ever-giving Muslim that does not take care of themselves, I think this is a romanticized myth, and self-focusing isn't about being selfish in those situations. It's about understanding our own limits, and by doing so we can create a sustainable ability to give and to serve. So I think that's some of the more important reasons to look into concepts of self-focusing and self-care. So what is self-focusing? So what is self-focus?